Ok, ragazzi, è un po' che lo volevo vedere insieme a voi. Questo bel documentarietto riguarda un gioco che ha avuto un gigantesco successo nell'ultimo periodo e di cui si è discusso parecchio, ok? E il canale che ha fatto questo documentario è NoClip, famoso canale che vi consiglio caldamente di seguire. Abbiamo già visto parecchi documentari fatti da NoClip e questo è il documentario su Vampire Survivors, d'accordo? Non dura molto, è una mezz'oretta, quindi direi che, come al solito, ci cuffiamo, sistemiamo l'audio, via la musica, eccoci qua. E la cosa bella è che ci sono i sottotitoli in italiano. Giusti stavolta, proprio ufficiali, non capita mai. Quindi, bene così. I commenti li recupero dopo, ragazzi, intanto vediamo questo.
When Vampire Survivors burst onto the scene in 2022, people had a lot of questions. What exactly do I do in this game? Why is this so popular? And who the hell made this?
Vampire Survivors is a painfully simple video game. You control a character's movement, but their attacks are performed automatically on set timers. Your goal is to kill as many of the swarming enemies as possible by being aware of when your character is likely to attack.
Ha avuto un enorme
The more you kill, the
successo.
more experience
Ma
points
perché è
you get,
figo?
unlocking more weapons and upgrades.
It turns out that this simple concept is incredibly fun to play, and Vampire Survivors quickly took the world by storm, much to the surprise of its humble Italian creator, Luca Galante.
We wanted to tell the story of Vampire Survivors from its origins as a JavaScript side project to the team that rallied around Luca and the design of its weapons, characters and levels. So we were delighted when Luca was available to talk to us, especially as the only interviews he's done up until this point were via email. There was a catch though. Luca is a private person, and while he's okay talking to us, he didn't really want to use a webcam, which we understand. Developers don't owe us anything. Some folks really value their privacy. I mean, if the man doesn't go on stage to collect a BAFTA for Game of the Year, spoilers, he's probably not going to show his face for little old NoClip. So we thought if we weren't going to have Luca on webcam, how do we represent him in this video? How do we tell the story of his life growing up in Italy, his struggles to find work in England, and the many late nights he spent working on the game that would become Vampire Survivors?
So we did what any responsible documentarian would, and we had a puppet made.
Ma come?
Say hi, Luca. This is the story of Vampire Survivors.
Che bellezze, esatto. Ciao di Girort.
I used to play games of any kind. Really had this huge box of Commodore 64 cassettes and demos that were all full of, ripped off games, of course, that I inherited from my brother. And I would just every day just go through different games. I would just try literally everything. And then games that actually liked a lot were stuff like RPGs, Ultima series, Eye of the Beholder, Monkey Island, very big love of my life.
Serio?
And things changed quite a lot when the PlayStation came out, I think, when it became a bit easier to actually find games. Before then, I just had to go for whatever I could scrape and find in stores.
Ehi Lucky, ciao!
But with PlayStations, even in my little town near Rome, we finally started to see video game stores, and that's where I get into more, bit more mainstream stuff, maybe Final Fantasy, JRPGs in general, really. I started to study programming in high school in Italy. I've been making games in my spare time since then, really. When I was 25, I moved to London. It was like 10 years ago, 12, more or less. And at that time it was really difficult to find a job in the video game industry in Italy, and there was very little to work for.
Quanti soldi che ti sei fatto questo gioco? Forse un po', ma si vende a pochissimo. Quindi...
And I did find a job in McDonald's. That was great. And my English wasn't particularly good, so it was really difficult to have interviews.
Andare in Inghilterra a lavorare al McDonald's, ci sono passato.
When it comes to programming and games. And so, yeah, whatever. Just worked for McDonald's for almost 2 years, I think. Until my English was good enough to finally managed to go through some interviews, and I had reached a point in McDonald's when I was just like, you know what, I didn't come here to do this. I'm just going to go for the first job I find, as long as it involves programming, even if it is gambling related.
Non ti ricordi?
And so, of course,
Esatto.
the first job I found was gambling related.
Despite his worries about working on gambling games, Luca really enjoyed his first job in the industry.
Oh mio
He got
Dio,
on well
è
with
un
his coworkers
tantinello
and mostly spent time fixing
osceno
bugs
tutto
in
ciò.
existing games. He progressed through the ranks and found himself in a
Tantissimi iniziano il
mid-level
gioco da...
management position with
se
lots
ci sono i
of
posti.
paperwork and office politics and much less development work. Luca was desperate for a creative outlet.
What happened then is that I was so fed up with everything, and I wanted so much to start making my own games, that I started to wake up at 2 a.m, work on my own RPG.
Per un attimo pensavo
in
fosse la mia di
Unity
sveglia.
until 6 in the
Maledetti.
morning, then go to the office, do my 8 hours, and then I come back home and go to bed at 6 p.m. And that lasted for about 3 months, and I did a lot of progress.
Luca was now living two lives. By night, he was a creative creature, pouring his life force into his little prototype in Unity. And by day, he was an office worker, performing his job and paying the bills.
But this prototype work quickly stopped when Luca bagged a job as a technical director on a gaming startup, a job that required him to work long hours in Unity.
This was in the middle of the pandemic, really. Sorry, at the start of the pandemic. So it was really difficult to find a job. And just to cheer myself up, I just went to develop something in the language that I know better, which is JavaScript, using the engine I know the most, which is FASA. And I just started for fun to work on, a prototype that at that time didn't have a name. Once in a while, I used to look for stuff in the asset store in Unity or on Real Marketplace that is just a game framework. So something that, it's already a game, but I have to script it. I have to make content for it. And you never find something that is that straightforward. So I was like, maybe I can make something that straightforward, which is super basic from a gameplay perspective, and then I can just have fun making content for. And because at that time I was playing
Vampiro assomiglia a Victor Laso? No, ma povero Victor.
I was like, this is super simple. Maybe I can just make this super simple thing in FASA and see how it goes. And I did the super simple thing in FASA, and very often when I reach that point of making a prototype, I stop. And this time instead, just decided to change the programmer art. It was just black and white circles with the assets from an asset pack that I almost always use to make prototypes. And this asset pack happened to be inspired by Castlevania. I dropped in these assets, the new prototype, and now the prototype looked amazing. I just absolutely fell in love with the visuals, with the ugly pixels getting all scaled the wrong way and mudded up, all the colors on the screen. I just absolutely loved it. And because I was having fun just by playing the prototype without having a timer, without having score, goals, experience, nothing. It was just fun to annihilate everything you see on the screen.
Posso fare una piccola pausa, ragazzi? Quello che avete appena sentito è una cosa che continuo a sentire dagli sviluppatori di videogiochi e ha una importanza fondamentale che moltissimi davvero vedo che sottovalutano, ok? Avete sentito quello che ha appena detto? Non c'era niente, non c'era il punteggio, non c'era nulla, c'era soltanto lo schermo e il distruggere le cose. Ed era già semplicemente divertente così. No? Mi ricorda molto i sviluppatori di Celeste, che hanno detto che hanno passato un mese a far sì che il personaggio, quando salta, quando si muove su e giù, doveva essere figo semplicemente muoversi nel livello. Ed è il game feel, cioè ed è la sensazione di divertirsi anche proprio con il core del gameplay. Poi ci si costruisce intorno tutto il resto. Questa secondo me è una cosa di un'importanza gigantesca.
The original plan was to make 5 different maps that were all the same. Actually, it was just a different texture for the background. And so yeah, once again, that was mostly experimental. The first stage that came up was the library. I just decided to give it a shot and see if I would actually build stages that were a bit more interesting than just an unlimited field. The process to make weapons and actually everything, but then turn into, okay, I grab a sprite from this asset pack. What is this? It's a knife. Okay, cool. Going to make the simple possible projectile I can imagine with this and just shoot in the direction you're facing. Is it fun? Yes. Okay, fantastic. That's it. Next. It was absolutely random. Just pick something and throw it in there. When I felt the game was complete, I put it on itch. I think it was during the summer, I don't remember, before the summer, April, and no one cared. And that was upsetting because I was hoping that maybe a handful of people would notice it and maybe post a few comments. And so I was like, well, this isn't working. I did try to show the game at the very least to other people who use Phaser, and even then, nothing happened really. And so I was like, okay, if nobody's noticing this on itch, I will try to put it on Steam. I don't know, the fee is not huge, it's for, what is, 100 pounds maybe? And so it's like, maybe I'll get some more visibility on there, I don't know. And then maybe if I get lucky, I can also recover expenses, you know. A lot, if not most, of the games I used to play on Steam, I bought them on huge sales, 70% off, 90% off. So for me to pay a game $3, £3, whatever, and then play for it for 400 hours is normal. And so I was like, look, this is a game with very little production value. I cannot sell this for a crazy amount
Sempre
of
visto il
money.
settore,
So for me, it was
c'hanno le voci,
priced in
il
a
divertimento
smart
è praticamente il
way,
game
it was
feel, se ci
priced
pensi.
in
In
a
parte
fair
sì, in parte
way. The
sì.
game was published on Steam on December the 17th, the day after I got COVID, being knocked out for a couple of weeks. That was probably the hardest part, to implement everything you need to actually put a web game on Steam, because Vampire Survivors was born as an HTML5 game. And so yeah, because I was feeling not great on that 17th of December because of COVID, I just pressed the publish button. I was like, okay, it's done. Bye. See you in a week.
During this period, Luca did eventually find a job. It was at a game studio called Marmalade, who worked on Monopoly games for mobile and PC. He worked as a gameplay designer, but never felt comfortable there because he felt intimidated by how good everyone else on the team was. So he decided to leave and go back to the gambling company he worked at before, except this time as a web developer. But then 3 days into his old new job, something unexpected happened.
So I think it was the 7th of January, if I'm not wrong. I went to take down the Christmas tree and I noticed a message of someone telling me that a Splattercat had made a video on Vampire Survivors.
My name is Splattercat. I sift through the file to find what's worthwhile in the world of indie games every single day so you don't have to. Today up on the chopping block, we had the Vampire Survivors. It's like $3. I promise you're going to have a good time. I'll see you later. Thanks for
So I stopped trying to take down the Christmas tree and I go and see what's happening. And that's when I see the Steam data and I see that there is a spike in sales, basically, and in users. And that was very surreal. It wasn't huge, but it was definitely like 10, 20 times what it used to be. And that's how it started, basically. There was an initial phase of, okay, what the
Che
heck
figo.
do I do
Io l'ho
now?
finito, Vampire Survivor, sono arrivati i
Just
titoli di
started to
coda.
ask for help
Che poi
to
vabbè, non è
just to
letteralmente
help on
finirlo,
some
ma...
bugs, basically, and issues that I wasn't expecting, because if your game goes to 100 people, maybe you get 1 or 2 people complaining for a bug. Once you get 10 times as many, or 100 times as many, even if this is a very small bug, you will get a lot of complaints.
So Sam, when did you come into the picture in terms of helping out Luca?
Yeah, it was shortly after it blew up, just in terms of, you know, helping with fixing bugs, helping with save data issues and things like that. As you suddenly got this user base growing, you've got to deal with a lot more
Ciao Giacomo.
customers.
Ciao Cyberlook, ho
requests
comprato
and things like
a
that.
fine di quel di
Did
genere
you
prima
meet
impressione
Luca back
insane. È stato veramente figo, sì. Se ci pensate ha lanciato un sottogenere.
As a student, and Luke was actually my buddy that was assigned when I joined to sort of show me the ropes. he's kind of swooped in and saved me from that industry once the game blew up. When Lucas started doing that prototyping, and obviously through the pandemic and between those jobs, like you said before, we've all been friends for a little while, and there was a group of us that once a month, once every couple of weeks, we were just having a kind of show and tell, essentially, for our personal projects. And it was obvious as we were going through these and Luca was building what became Vampire Survivors, quite often you'd find that we're sitting and playing
stasera.
Vampire Survivors
DS2
instead of
forse.
paying attention to the next person's
Finito con tutti i DLC, droga, non gioco. No, io non ho giocato i DLC.
Like,
gioco originale e basta.
And I only survived till 6 minutes, and sort of competing against each other just in those show and tells, playing it there and then. So kind of, even in those early stages, you could see the promise of it.
Sam was one of a number of freelancers that Luca brought on, not just to fix bugs, but to help with community management, programming support, and crucially to port the game out of the JavaScript that it had been coded in for Phaser, so that it could eventually be ported to consoles.
With more people available to help, Luca could once again focus on making new content, new weapons, new levels, and new characters.
No, è oggi.
So these freelancers have been helping with porting the game to a different engine, one that could actually go eventually on consoles, mobile, and so on. Let's say that in January, the amount of people that were working on the game already, on the actual JavaScript, it was just me plus Sam and another developer for some minor bug fixing. A couple of freelancers full-time on the new engine, plus a community manager part-time. At first I wanted a little community to chat with and exchange ideas. I have made a Discord server and I was active on the Steam forum and everything, because once again I was expecting 100 people, maybe 200. I would have been really happy with 200, just perfect. When it suddenly gets 2,000 and then 20,000, well, you either shut everything down or you get someone to help you with the community. And so we have Beth, who joined as a community manager, who's been doing an absolutely fantastic job since then. If the game managed to stay somewhat relevant for a whole year, it is, in my opinion, definitely thanks to everything Beth has been doing on the community side of things.
Ciao Toti.
So, the demo
lo sguardo che ho fatto, però non ho proferito parola. Non ho detto niente.
In the beginning. So I think the very first version
non ho fiatato.
in December had 7 characters, 1 stage, and I think 18 weapons. So considering that in the end we ended up with 40 characters, 10 stages, 72 between weapons and power-ups, 7 major gameplay mechanics that were never intended to be in the game to begin with.
Obviously, all of this comes from Luca. It comes straight out of his brain. He implements it on the JavaScript side, and then on the engine port, the entire process, we've just been playing catch up. It's like he will come in after a weekend and we'll look at the commit history and it will just be like,
grande sguardo, grazie ragazzi.
But having said that, it's really interesting because we come in and we get this sudden, oh look what he's made over.
Che figo quando crei questa zona dove non passa niente, puoi stare là, puoi mollare il pad proprio, esatto.
The galaxy effect and things like that, all of these crazy particle effects, the things with gravity wells where you've got these swirling particles happening. Those are the ones that are always, you look at them and you're in awe of it, and then you kind of panic and go, okay, how are we going to build this as well?
Is that the same workflow you still use, Luca? Do you work on the JavaScript version still to this day and the guys sort of port that one over?
Yes, at a very different rate compared to last year.
Gesù!
But, because it works well, because if you're a developer, if you get the design document in front of you, it's open to interpretation and everything, and it raises a lot of questions. If instead you have to port over something that you can already see fully implemented, that you can have access to the code as well, I think it just becomes much more straightforward. Right now, it's honestly not that important. If you make a new weapon and the weapon turns out in a different way than I made in JavaScript, not a big deal. But back when we were working on porting the main game, the new engine, that was very important to get everything exactly the same, because I wanted people to have the exact same experience. I didn't want to change things, I just wanted to be better. So basically we had a first fully working version of this new engine already during the summer.
Sono contento che poi Konami gli ha fatto la collab di Castlevania invece di fargli causa. Serio. Quanto avrebbe venduto sto gioco? Oh, un puttanaio di copie, veramente tanti.
The problem is the physics system we were using was too realistic, basically. There was friction, there were enemies bouncing on one another, and that felt wrong. That felt like a different game. I didn't feel the stupid things in Vampire Survivors with the weird arcade movements. And so because of that, we had to redo the whole physics engine.
Ogni tanto scappano fuori dei livelli, dei mostri o delle cose che non ho mai visto.
200 explosions on the screen, you don't want to play 200 sound effects. So there was a sound system basically to port over, so that stuff sounds the same rhythm and everything. The fonts, I think there's still a problem. Yes, I see some face. The fonts took forever to get a font that didn't look as bad as the JavaScript one, but also not too good. Just, a bit of an improvement. Really.
Sì, ma voglio bet.
That's why it took way longer than expected
Silenzio.
to actually do the port.
There were a lot of things like that along the way where it was kind of like, we'd implement something, we'd look
Un modo per cercare di nascondere il fatto lavorare anch'io.
It looks too good, we need to make it crappier to kind of replicate the exact look of the original game. So it's a really interesting process, going sort of opposite to how you would normally think of, take a game and make it look better.
In an industry that is constantly trying to break new ground visually, there is something refreshing about a game which is intentionally trying to look worse. It certainly adds to the charm of Vampire Survivors and makes implementing new characters and weapons
ormai direi che è anche
that
abbastanza
easier.
comune,
So while we're on the topic, I wanted to talk about possibly the roughest part of the entire game, the thing that you first see when you load up Vampire Survivors, the main menu.
So I absolutely love working with UIs. If we ignore the menu for a second, if you see like the in-game pause menu, it just
Davide, grazie mille dei bits.
doesn't appear in
Fatto
your
ritorno,
face,
ce ne sono
but
ancora
there
a
is a
voglia.
little animation that just makes it appear. Or when you open the Arcanas menu, I spent 3 days making sure that feels good because I really like working with UIs. But the main menu is different. The main menu doesn't have to be pretty. The main menu.
Bello che solo noi italiani possiamo capire certe cose. Sì, certi nomi di cose.
One of the
Sì.
games I played during the
Decisamente.
was, One Step from Eden, which is this roguelike that I absolutely loved. And in One Step from Eden,
Mai provato
you
questo.
get absolutely beautiful menus, but on the main menu you can just tap X or whatever 3 times and you jump immediately into a new run. And I wanted the same thing. I wanted to be able on the main menu, Vampire Survivor, just to tap a button 3 times and that's it, you're playing, don't have to worry about anything. And so that's why the menus are ugly. They're just in your face. And just like you said, as we kept adding more stuff, we just kept making the menus more complex. I'm trying to mimic that effect that I had making the game of stuff appearing only when you need it, really.
As the game grew
Ma
in
vaffanculo,
popularity,
IGN.
Luca wanted to implement more characters, weapons, and stages. Many of the ideas that hadn't
Il
made it
7
into
di
the game were
IGN
being
è un
put
meme
together for their first
costante
DLC pack,
ormai.
Legacy of the Moonspell.
But before we do any of that, I
Allora,
wanna go
Damer
right
l'ho
back to the
provato,
start
non
and
mi è
ask Luca,
dispiaciuto,
what were the
però
inspirations behind
a
some of
una
Vampire
certa mi sono
Survivors' more
stufato.
iconic
Troppi,
weapons and characters?
How
troppi
about we start
limiti.
with one of my favorites, the King Bible.
What to say about that? Well, first of all, I got the sprite from the asset pack and I removed the cross.
Don
and
Mario,
put a plus sign instead, just to avoid trouble with people who might be sensitive to the actual cross.
l'avevo
With
rimosso.
real vampires, so who knows? Yeah, the name is a stupid pun on the name of a underground station in Rome called Re Bibbia, which in English literally translates to King Bible. This very stupid thing. Garlic, I don't know, it just felt so good when I made this incredibly stupid, simple weapon that
È invece una delle mie preferite.
That touches you, or that tries to touch you. And yeah, I knew that would
È fantastica.
be the favorite weapon of most.
Quel modo si chiamava mortaccio.
Sì. Because in Italian,
Pummarola.
Santa means holy. So I wanted to have something that looked as cool as the holy flames visual effects from Divinity 2, and I have totally not nailed it. The best weapon is the pentagram, of course. Worst weapon, clock lancet. Boring.
Is it Carello?
Carello, oh my god, no, why did you ask for that? I won't tell you the whole story, but let's just say the character is the ghost of an old lady who used to steal supermarket cards, basically, and now she's throwing them around. Originally, characters were supposed to just be a different
clerici,
really.
si
The main
assunta.
thing about the character was just supposed to be the starting weapon. It was supposed to be a way you choose your initial weapon. As the game got bigger, that was ridiculous to keep as an idea, so I just started to try and add something different to every character. Not those ones though. Those ones were always supposed to be the joke
Peppino.
characters, as if the others aren't jokes, but anyway. Those were supposed to be the most weird ones, for sure. A lot of enemies definitely are similar in terms of stats, but they all have their individual stats, and they change depending on the stage of the amount of enemies as well, and all of that. I think the major differences really are between enemies.
Tower Lord, sì, sì, a Vampire
fixed amount
Survivors.
of health, enemies that instead scale over time, scale with your level, basically. Other than
Peppino,
that,
no, è
there are
Peppino
minus
perché è un
skills in the
pino.
enemies, but honestly, the enemies are smart enemies aren't really the
Sì,
the
sento
point
i
of the
vostri
game.
facepalm
There is
fin da
no
qua.
AI whatsoever in the game.
But yeah, since the 1.0 release has been, our focus did change to the DLC, didn't it? But a lot of the time on the development side, at least, outside of Luca doing the creative work and actually building the content, just went on to how do we do a DLC? How do we load DLC on a JavaScript game via Steam, via Game Pass, via, on the engine port. So there was a lot of learning for us just on that initial one, besides even building the content.
So the settings existed before. The idea to actually turn them into a DLC pack arrived sometime during the summer, because at that time I finally had all the assets I needed to actually finish the game, to make the actual ending. And then I was like, okay, what do we do now? Glober was available. Glober Kotaki is the guy who's making the pixel art for the characters. So he was available to do more work, and I was like, well, let's start into something that then we'll use somehow. And I just
Quando la borra la prima volta ho riso più del dovuto,
in my,
ovviamente.
quote unquote spare time. When I do something new, I usually start.
Ieri sera ho schiappato il cielo, devo cambiare la batteria. Ah, minchia, ok, cazzo, mi dispiace.
Things a lot. Of course, you won't have to struggle actually.
Tra un po' anche il mio povero iPhone 7 mi lascerà. Spero il più tardi possibile, perché
It kind of loops
non
back
avrei
around to what
soldi
Luca
ora.
said right near the start about how he wanted to build something that was more of a framework for putting the content in a sense. He's built some really great systems for, ultimately everything is pretty data driven, so he can define, number of enemies that spawn at this minute and what enemies would spawn and the way they spawn. It makes it quite easy for us to sort of chop and change things, and when he's designing stages to balance all that stuff. Yeah, it's a very flexible system. I think
Babbiona.
that's why you see such rapid content updates from Luca.
After a year of new content, the team eventually raised the cost of the game from $3 to $5, but spent weeks on Twitter telling everyone about the price hike. This consumer-first ethos has likely contributed to the insanity of their over 180,000 reviews on Steam, which still have the game rated as overwhelmingly positive.
It's very tempting to look at the success of Vampire Survivors and make broad claims about what it says about our industry. That in an era where new ideas seem so rare, a game as simple as Vampire Survivors can grab onto our imaginations so tightly.
But I think it's fair to say that in many ways Vampire Survivors is a rebuke of the grandness and complexity of large AAA games, a terrific example of the power of keeping a simple idea simple, of respecting your players' time and their wallets. But before it was any of that, before it was a multi-award-winning, breakthrough global sensation, Vampire Survivors was simply something an Italian immigrant living in London worked on to flex his creative muscles, to create something his friends would enjoy playing, to escape
Zigboom,
his day
grazie mille della
job
sub.
and make something that would make him smile. It's just that it turned out it made a lot of us smile too.
Dai, che bello, sono molto contento e penso di poter dire, ragazzi, che questo è uno di quei casi in cui è esattamente come mi aspettavo che sarebbe stato, no? Non so voi, ma è esattamente quello che mi aspettavo da questo documentario, tranne un paio di cosette, ma è proprio il tono che va benissimo così, quasi mi scende la lacrima no, però è veramente bello tutto ciò, quello che è successo. Comunque il messaggio, secondo me più importante di tutti, è proprio quello in cui stava creando qualcosa e quando si è reso conto che quello che stava creando era figo anche semplicemente girando a vanvera per il livello, senza punteggi, senza niente, senza tante armi, senza... così, è stata la cosa determinante ed è una cosa che tutti i giochi devono, secondo me, raggiungere e troppo spesso se lo dimenticano per andare a favore di tante altre cose. È una cosa che trovo piuttosto ricorrente, devo dire. Sì, allora, il successo è meritatissimo, infatti, e sta ancora pubblicando DLC, se non sbaglio, vero? Lo stanno ancora ampliando, se non sbaglio. Sia Vampire Survivors che Balatro ci hanno ampiamente dato prova in questi anni, bastano idee semplici per rendere i videogiochi grandiosi. Assolutamente sì, questo è la verità e soprattutto non è soltanto in questi anni, ormai il mondo indie ce lo ha dimostrato più che ampiamente tutto questo, no? Quindi viva il mondo indie, viva anche queste idee e che bello che esiste un sistema, perché una volta non c'era quando ero ragazzino io, in cui uno a caso, con decisamente poche risorse ma con la giusta abilità e ispirazione, può prendere, creare qualcosa in JavaScript, pubblicarlo su Steam e dopo dei tentativi su itch.io, su Discord eccetera che non sono andati proprio a buon fine, una volta che arriva su Steam piano piano l'idea si diffonde e se è figo si sparge come un incendio, nel suo caso veramente tanto, no? Ad altri non va così bene, anche per giochi validi, però è bellissimo che esista questa dinamica ed è uno dei motivi per cui non credo mai a quelli che dicono oh mio Dio, la crisi dei videogiochi. Ragazzi, finché esistono sistemi come questi qua, in cui uno con la giusta idea e un po' poche risorse, ma con la giusta idea e le giuste conoscenze è in grado di sparare una cosa su Steam e improvvisamente diffondere il proprio gioco come un incendio così in barba a tutte le dinamiche che di solito si criticano nel mondo dei videogiochi, il mondo dei videogiochi è comunque meraviglioso, non trovate? Nonostante quello che si dice e nonostante le legittime spesso critiche che si fanno a certi ambiti del videogioco. Finché esistono queste dinamiche qua, il mondo dei videogiochi non morirà mai e non stagnerà mai. Sono molto contento di tutto questo. Sì, gran bel documentario e 100 di questi Vampire Survivors. Sì.